Hey guys, Omni here. It's that time of the year to go through my favorite films and some of my least favorite films of 2021. So we're going to kick it off with I'm just going to go ahead and talk about some of my least favorite films. Now I have not seen a lot of movies, so there's going to be a lot of films that are on neither of these lists. Um, just to make it easier, so you guys have a frame of reference to what I've actually watched this year, I might just I might just put every movie that I just list every movie that I saw in the description, so you guys can be like, oh, okay, I get it. He hasn't seen such and such movie. It's not on this list because there are a lot of movies that I really wanted to go check out. A lot more of these are tour films. A lot of these smaller releases that unfortunately just did not release here whatsoever. So I never really had the opportunity to go see it. So there's a lot of films like that that I wanted to check out, but I just haven't. So we're going to start off with some of my least favorites of the year. We're going to be counting down from 10 to 1, 1 being my least favorite movie of the year. So we'll kind of be doing that, just a kind of a frame of work here. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about each movie, but just to kick it off, at number 10 is actually The Matrix Resurrections. Now, I'm mixed on this movie, so to give you the scale, that's why I'm not saying the worst movies of the year or anything like that, or what I think are the best movies of the year. These are my personal picks. And this is number 10 because I still don't think it's a bad movie per se. It's just a bad Matrix movie in my opinion. I've talked at length in a couple of different videos in the pitch meeting and the actual, almost 20-minute review that I did on the film about some of the things that I just really kind of struggled to get past with it. It was disappointing at the end of the day. Number 9 is going to be Mortal Kombat. I had some high expectations for this from the promise of the action and all that stuff. And while some of that was great, the direction wasn't. The Cole Young was not a character I could gravitate towards. The changes that they made to the storylines and stuff just seemed unnecessary. And some of the added elements to the lore just, again, unnecessary. For having such a cast and for casting around martial arts talent, they just could not show the action well. For something that had so many talented martial artists in it, it was extremely disappointing because it had a lot of quick cuts, a lot of bad shots. You couldn't follow the action a lot of the time. It was just sloppy action for something that promised crazy action. And speaking of, that transitions quite well into my number 8, Snake Eyes. A lot of promise here. The storyline I actually kind of liked with what they did with the character, his background and all of that. But again, disappointed in the action for a character shrouded in this this lifestyle that he's brought up in combat, in honor and all that. And again, same problem except in this one, everything is so dark. The whole setting, the nighttime fights, the way everything's shot is just, it's shaky cam to the extreme, and it's just chopped up. Again, something that really should have relied a lot on its action, it just didn't deliver at all for me. But it was a decent watch, but it's just not, I don't know. It was another disappointing sell to me. Number 7 is going to be Venom 2, Let There Be Carnage. While I enjoyed a lot of elements of this movie, some things in this one worked that quite didn't work in the first film. The first film was a much more coherent narrative across the board, better editing, pacing, all that jazz, even if it is light on the action. This one has a little more of that action, leans way more into the comedy element of it, but it's just the editing and the pacing of this film and some of the performances that really made it difficult to enjoy this movie in entirety. It just seemed like, hey, we have carnage. Number 6, Jungle Cruise. This movie takes two very charismatic actors like The Rock and Emily Blunt and puts them together in a way that it just didn't work. They always didn't, they never felt like they were really truly bouncing off of one another. It just kind of almost seemed like they were acting off walls to me throughout it. Again, the story is like paint by numbers, just rip-offs of things we've seen before, other films, even to the exact premise of the movie. So yeah, it was fun. I had some laughs, but overall, I could take it or leave it. My number 5 is Space Jam 2. Similar story to Jungle Cruise. There are some elements in here I liked, but again, it was just a big old, I know the thing everybody says, and I have to agree, it's just a big old flex from Warner Brothers to be like, hey, look at all the things we own. Story, not that great. Acting, aside from Don Cheadle, who was having a lot of fun with this role, was not good. It was fun seeing some of the worlds and whatnot. I know this is a kids movie. That is not a defense for the film, because there are plenty great and well thought out and like effective children's movies that work for adult audiences. Number 4 is Halloween Kills. I thought this movie was extremely disappointing following up the last one. I know there's plenty of people that loved it just to turn your brain off and just watch the gore flow, but the movie made no sense. It was nonsensical. It was trying to juggle too many ideas at once. The editing was awful, in my opinion. I did not enjoy it. The characters were just laughable, comical caricatures, and that's not what Halloween is to me. I know a lot of people are like, oh, that's just slasher movies. It's like Halloween always was different to me. Even when it wasn't in its best run, it still took itself seriously, had characters you liked and whatnot, and gravitated towards those characters in a way. And so it was just like, for me, it just seemed like a stepping stone to get to the movie they wanted to tell. Similarly, like with Jurassic World and Fallen Kingdom, how Colin Trevorrow himself is always like, yeah, it might not be the great, but we just wanted to get to this story because I want to tell that story, but I can't go from here to here. So there's got to be a through line. And that seems like what this is. The whole Evil Dies Tonight, the whole thing is just like knowing there's already a sequel because they announced it well before this movie ever came out. I don't know. It just hampered the entire enjoyment for me. Number 3, Resident Evil Welcome to Raccoon City. Disguised behind the familiarity of some of the characters looking like characters from the game. It's just like I mentioned in my review, it's a lot of familiar objects, references, names, places, and looks just kind of jumbled together, and what kind of is an attempt at a coherent story, but it just falls apart throughout. Gunpowder Milkshake comes in at my number 2, and that's because this again has a actress that I really adore, a lot of great actors and actresses in this film, but this newcomer director did not know what to do with this. The writing for this was not great. It was an attempt at building out a Netflix trying to build out their own little John Wick universe, and it was just so bad. For somebody that I've seen do some pretty good action, the action in this was very sloppily shot. Last on this list is Willy's Wonderland, coming in at number 1, my least favorite movie of the year. I didn't like it. I know it was campy. I know it was not meant to be taken seriously, but it was just so boring to me. There's not a thing about this movie that that got a reaction out of me that wasn't like just this. If you actually want a better movie that is a similar kind of idea, a similar kind of vein to this, actually, because I watched it almost immediately after it, the day after I watched this, was the Banana Splits movie from, I believe, 2019. For something that was an old Hanna-Barbera property that got repurposed into a horror film a la Freddy, Five Nights at Freddy, it does it way better. Cheesy, campy, but it leans into itself and knows what it is, and it's much more better executed. All right, guys, now let's get into my favorite films of 2021. Starting with number 10, Dune. This movie was visually stunning. It was just gorgeous. The technical elements that went into bringing this to life. The only things that kind of put this at the back of the list for me is just there's an emotional absence in this movie for me as far as the characters that's kind of lost in translation, I think, with what's going on. Everything is grand in scope. Everything is beautiful. It's well directed, well shot. The actors are great. It's just there was nothing that really got me emotionally invested in the film, and it is a part 1. This is basically reading half a book and just stopping and stepping away. But the technical marvel that went into this and the visual eye candy that this movie was gets it on this list. My number 9 is The Eternals, which you might be like, really? Eternals over Dune? Actually, you're probably going to be like that with a lot of the movies that are on this list. Again, this is my personal picks, personal flavor, so have that. So Eternals, for me, it takes that scope and scale that Dune is trying to go for. But for me, and I know not everybody else felt this way about this film, is I actually got quite emotionally invested in the characters, their journeys, their strengths, their flaws, their dreams, their wants. And I like that there's kind of a moral gray question at the end of this film rather than a normal punchy villain. Sure, there's a punchy fight scene at the end, but that is just something that is accentuating the deeper conflict at hand there, is whether or not they should allow this calamity to happen. And I like that element of the movie. And I like the visuals. I like the storytelling. I like the characters, though some of them I wish got more screen time than others. but I like it. It's not your typical Marvel movie, and the reception definitely shows. My number 8 is Nobody, Bob Odenkirk's Nobody. Whereas Gunpowder Milkshake didn't quite succeed in the way that I think Netflix was hoping with kind of getting a kind of John Wick-like film up and running, this takes an unlikely formula and puts an unlikely actor into it, and it has an unlikely result. It was really charming, and it definitely feels distinct from John Wick in a lot of ways that Gunpowder Milkshake did not. And I really liked what they did with this, with grounding Bob Odenkirk into this role, and it allows him and his creativity and his comedic timing to really kind of shine here and make it feel something different from what we've seen before. You know, it treads a lot of similar territory, but it keeps things simple, it keeps things clean, and it's not as over the top as some of the John Wick things start to get, but it's grounded. It's probably one of the more grounded attempts at diving into something similar to this, and Bob Odenkirk just shines in this. As somebody I would not have ever pegged for an action star, he put in the work, he took the hits, and he came out doing a pretty dang good job. My number 7 is Free Guy, which I honestly did not expect to like this movie half as much as I did, but this movie was, I think, exactly one of the things that we needed during this time. It was heartwarming, it was fun, it was energetic, it was funny. Sure, there's some fan servicey moments in here, but it's done in a fun and playful way that it just never bothered me. Ryan Reynolds, his chemistry, he's playing Ryan Reynolds, but he has a lot of other supporting cast members that are carrying this film as well alongside him, and they bounce off of him quite well. And I really liked everything in this movie. I think maybe the weakest part of it maybe have been Taika Waititi's character a little bit, might be about pushing things a little too far, but I like the fun that it had with the world, the way that it kind of played on video game tropes, and even the meta commentary from the YouTubers that you would recognize didn't actually distract me from the film, but actually helped ground it a little bit. Yeah, I don't know. This movie was a surprise to me. My number 6 film is going to be Shang-Chi and the Legends of the Ten Rings. This movie is probably, debatably, my favorite origin story in the MCU that we've got. The solo origin story that we got in here, as well as one of my favorite, if not my favorite, singular villains that we've had in the MCU with Wen Wu. I really like what they did in this. I love the visuals. I love the aesthetic. It was bright. It was colorful. And it lent itself to that Chinese martial arts, Hong Kong kind of style, as we got, you know, former members of Jackie Chan's own stunt crew coming over to help with the action. And it definitely shows. And it does kind of play like a little bit of an elevated Hong Kong martial arts film for the first 2/3 of the movie, until, you know, of course, it gets into the more typical Marvel CGI fest at the end, where it becomes a little more of an anime. So I definitely gravitated towards that still. It never did actually distract from me at all. Number 5 on my list is Godzilla vs. Kong, and you might be like, what the heck? Why is this above anything? Well, I grew up with kaiju movies. I grew up on Godzilla. And while this is probably the most turn your brain off and just have fun movie that I saw this year, saw it more than once, watched it at home thanks to HBO Max on top of that, with theatrical viewing, and I just enjoyed it from beginning to end. They knew exactly what to do with this, gave the human plot just enough to skirt the plot by and get the exposition across, but they did what the other films had not and focused on the monsters. The monsters themselves were characters in this, and the humans actually felt like supporting cast members in this to the monsters. The fights were big, they were sweeping, and unlike most versus movies, we got a definitive winner, and we know my guy came out on top. But number 4 is Last Night in Soho, Edgar Wright's latest film starring Thomasin McKenzie and Anya Taylor-Joy, as well as Matt Smith. I really enjoyed this film. I like most of Edgar Wright's work, so this was a lot of fun. I went into this, you know, kind of expecting a little bit of what we got, but I got a lot of twists that I did not expect. The performances in this are top-notch. It's a fair mix and blend of a period piece that takes place both in present day and early 60s London, as we get this weird unraveling mystery / horror / thriller that really just kind of keeps you on your toes. And it's just, again, Edgar Wright knows how to edit, blend, transition, and do some really fun things with the camera, and I definitely recommend checking it out. Number 3, The Suicide Squad. This movie is probably, since Aquaman, the most fun I've had watching a DC film. I think James Gunn is a perfect fit for this type of story. I think he really knows, especially after Guardians of the Galaxy and stuff, how to bring together and add layers of warmth and depth and humanity to a bunch of people that probably don't deserve it. And it came out working really well. The comedy hit all across the board for me. There's a couple characters in this movie that definitely shone for me, and new favorites of mine, definitely for sure. And I'm excited to see what he does with these as he goes off into the spinoff with Peacemaker that we're going to be covering here on the channel. I'm still not sure what to expect from that, but we're going to be checking it out and reacting to it here on the channel, so I hope you stick around for that. But I really enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun, and I can't wait to see what more comes from James Gunn on the DC side of things. Number 2, this is where I think we're definitely going to get a little controversial, definitely considering. But again, personal taste. And this is like one of those things where it's like, man, I've been debating this all day long. Which one am I going to put over the other? And it's for some very particular reasons. And I'll get to that here momentarily. But my number 2 is Spider-Man No Way Home. This movie, as far as theatrical experiences, since Endgame has been the most phenomenal that I've been to. You know, I think one of the things that does kind of hamper this, and it's not the fault of the studio or the movies itself, it's just like this movie probably would have hit even harder. And this movie hit hard with the twists, the turns, the reveals, and all that stuff. But so much of it was already kind of out in the ether. That all aside, though, this movie was a love letter to the fans. Spider-Man is my second favorite superhero of all time, hands down. The other, of course, is Batman, lo and behold. But I adore this character, and I grew up watching the Sam Raimi films with Tobey Maguire, and then even transitioned into the Andrew Garfield saga, and then onward into Tom Holland. Grew up on the 90s animated series as well. I love this character, and this movie, in a way that I feel like Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse did a really good job at being a love letter to Spider-Man itself. This, just as a whole, I think this movie did a phenomenal job at rounding out Tom Holland's trilogy and being a love letter to anybody that grew up with these characters along the way, being a love letter to the live action history of Spider-Man. But that all down leads into my number 1 movie of 2021. I'm sure some of you might have guessed this. Some of you all might be surprised. Some of you might just be like, the fuck are you thinking? But my favorite film of the year is Zack Snyder's Justice League. And I know the moment I said Zack Snyder, some people are already like, dislike. But like, I gotta say, man, I've not been a huge fan of Zack Snyder. I've been very open about that. I don't particularly like Batman vs. Superman. I think it took things in a weird direction. It does improve with the Ultimate Edition, and I think as a trilogy, it works better with this film and Man of Steel kind of bookending it. But I'm always kind of hit or miss on his directorial films, like stuff that he dives into. But this film is just one of those mystical unicorns of a thing. This weird, just culmination of a lot of tragic events, a lot of studio mishandling, a lot of just shady stuff in the background, and a fan demand that just would not quit. While some things definitely went into a direction that I definitely 100% do not condone at all. What happened to Zack was dirty. And I was one of those people that when I saw the first cut of Justice League from Joss Whedon, it wasn't great, but I enjoyed it. I had fun, but I didn't know what the heck I was missing. You know, even though I was like kind of put off by Batman versus Superman, I was one of those people that was like, maybe Zack shouldn't continue on. And then, you know, rumors, talking, spreads about what his vision was going to be, what it was going to build to, how it was different from what we actually got. On top of just the BS that went into systematically removing his control from the franchise just because the studio got scared that they're not able to keep up with Marvel. To finally, years later, thanks to HBO Max, they're able to put it together. We get the first teases, the trailers, the looks, and it's like, oh, Darkseid. Oh, Steppenwolf, he looks cool. Superman doesn't have the stupid mustache, like, faded off his lip. Like, it was good. It was amazing. And I thought it was a 4-hour epic. I thought it was gripping beginning to end. It was beautiful. The only minor nitpicks I had about the movie in general is there's like one scene that I wish just wasn't in the movie, and some scenes that were just a little bit shorter. Most notably, a lot of the musical sequences where it just kind of becomes a music video for a second. Aside from that, every other thing in this movie 100% worked for me. That 4 hours, I woke up 3 a.m., watched it on HBO Max, and I did not get up from my seat at all, once. And it just flew by. It was beautiful. It delivered. It just showed how, just kind of like the vision that he was going for. And I know even still, a lot of people don't jive with it, but I really liked it. It turned me from somebody who was very much a Zack Snyder doubter in what he was trying to set up, that I feel like we kind of denied ourselves an interesting future where I don't really know what's going on in the DCEU right now. I like the spinoffs that they got set up. The Batman looks cool. Some of the stories that are kind of like hand waving away some of the continuity just in lieu of having a good time, like the Suicide Squad. I can't say for certain that I know or that I like where this timeline's going. I don't know, because the Flash is going to come in and, like the Flash does in the comics, just wreck that continuity. So I don't really know. I don't know what to expect, but from seeing this film, I saw a vision that I didn't necessarily see with Batman versus Superman. And now I see it, and I was like, man, I feel like we might have been neglected something amazing. But what happened to get this film made, everything that went into finalizing it, all the hoops that Zack had to go through to even finish the film, even after they greenlight him being able to complete the film and put it out, there was still so much interference, even in this version of the movie, from things that they straight up was like, no, you cannot do that. That was in his original scripts. There's a lot of things he had to take out or chop up. So it's still not even really his final vision, but it is one that he compromised on. And at the end of the day, I really liked it. I would have liked to have seen where it went, and where we are now in a world where the Flash is going off into the multiverse. I don't see why this can't exist separately. But I do think that there's too much bad blood between the audience, Warner Brothers, and Zack himself to make this relationship even work. There's talks that it might continue in like a graphic novel format, but I don't know if that's going to come into anything. But I do think this movie gave us, like, easily for me, the best superhero moment out of damn near any film that I've seen. And that was the moment the Flash saved the day at the end of the movie. It was beautiful. The music was fantastic. That's another thing. The score in this movie was phenomenal. And at the end of the day, everybody had a part to play. It brought together all these characters, some that it introduced, though we do know them now from other films, but in this, it's wholly different versions of these characters, and they were all introduced organically, fleshed out. Cyborg was a character in this and had a lot to do, and he was the emotional heart and weight of the whole thing, and I really liked what they did with this. It's just like one of those weird moments in history that I think just needs to be marked. Like with Spider-Man No Way Home. That's something I felt like should have been expected at this point with Marvel tapping into the multiverse, with everybody tapping into the multiverse. I think it's the only reason that kind of keeps it below this on my list, is that I feel like while it gave us this moment, I'm sure like a few years ago, we never would have thought this would have happened. But if you've been paying attention to Marvel, it just kind of like, this is definitely the direction a lot of us was hoping it was going to go. We weren't sure. A lot of the evidence suggested it, but we didn't know that it would happen. But we had an idea that it could happen because of what we've seen with What If, what we've seen in WandaVision, what we've started to see moving into the current Phase 4 of MCU. It wasn't outlandish, but this was just a phenomenon to have somebody go back and completely re-put together an entire movie. Not from scratch, but there was a large chunk of the movie that wasn't finished. It was just like, I don't know. There's something about the movie that, one, I prefer DC at the end of the day. While I admit not all their stuff works when they try to do like live action stuff and whatever, but like as far as their universe goes, it's definitely the one that I prefer spending time in. So I do have a little bit of a lean towards that, but you know, it just made this difficult because it's pitting my favorite comic book universe versus my favorite Marvel superhero and there's things. So I just had to, this just barely edges out, guys. It's not like this just stomps Spider-Man No Way Home or undercuts it at all. It's just so barely that this passes it for me. But guys, that's my list. I'd really love to know what you thought. What was your top 10 favorite films? What was your top 10 least favorite films of the year? Sound off the comments. Let me know your thoughts down below. We'll carry on the conversation after the video. Before we go, I want to shout out our channel legends: Mandy Sherritt, Ryan Karen, Jason Coleman, Philly Vane, Yori Korskov, Margaret Grace, Mary Bradley, Jeffrey Hale, Various Abominations, and Nate Prouty. Thank you guys so much for your support throughout this year. Thank you everybody who's been tuning in and supporting the channel. We've grown a lot this year, and I really want to just thank everybody. And I hope you all have a safe and happy new year as we go into this brand new year. Hopefully 2022 is a little bit better, but we'll just have to wait and see. But guys, that's it for now, and I'll see you all in the new year. Take care, everybody.